prepared to discuss and share a very important initiative with you all. And before we go too far, I just want to start with some introductions. I'm Community Development Director Andrew McNichol. I see a few familiar faces in the crowd and a few new, which is very exciting. I'm very much looking forward to working with you on this project, as well as many other that are underway and to come. Joined with me to my right are Senior Planner Mary Benedetto and Economic Development Director Benjamin Cares. I believe both are closing in on their one-year anniversary with the town and do amazing work for us, so please welcome them as well. The town manager, Fidel Maltez, may join us shortly as well if he can. And I just want to give a quick shout out to my CPDC members in the audience tonight, which is Tom Armstrong, Hillary Mative, and Mark Wetzel. They have really helped prepare us through a lot of question and feedback, and they're also a very important partner in this project because they are the commission who will hold the public hearings related to any zoning amendments that may arise at the end of this initiative. So we're here with you all tonight and those joined on the Zoom call to discuss the MBTA Communities Law, otherwise known as Section 3A of the Zoning Act. We will refresh on what this law is, why we are acting on it now, what are some of the reasonings for it, and how we can move forward with your help. I know many have paused over what they feel this law may require, and many have a lot more questions as to what it means for Reading, and we will get through all of that. I just want to start by saying we acknowledge that while compliance with the law is required and should be sought, we also have the power to control our own futures, and we can use this project to help shape the sustainable and vibrant community that we all share a desire for. So creating change and having healthy conversations is not always easy, but it is needed. So I just want to assure you that our work does not stop here, and nor does it stop when any future zoning happens to pass. So we want to work with you to help ensure that any outcomes and built environments that we are seeing are achieving the larger community goals, and then what tools we can help to use to utilize and help further our vision and help that become a reality. So without sharing too much more, tonight I'm going to ask Mary to give you the entire presentation tonight, as many of you have become maybe too familiar with my voice over the years here. So I want to give her and our staff a chance to share with you all of the hard work that they have done in turning our words, conversations, and findings into what is a very thoughtful and comprehensive presentation. So I am very excited. I am very confident that you will leave here tonight having learned something new and having a lot of food for thought for going forward. So before too much more, just in case you aren't aware, restrooms are located just out to the left here on your right-hand side. We do have some water and snacks in the back for you as well. If you do happen to have a question or comment during any Q&A period, please do stand and speak loudly so those on the Zoom can hear you. If you are on the Zoom during Q&A, please use the raise hand feature found under reactions, or if you have a camera and are on camera, simply raise your hand and we'll look to acknowledge you. Or alternatively, you can type in the chat any questions you may have, and the host here will get them and read them out loud to us. So without further ado, the floor is yours, Mary.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you for coming tonight. We're going to cover all kinds of fun things. We're going to go over kind of what the goals are for tonight, so everyone's on the same page about why we're going to talk about all the things we're going to talk about. Our goals for the people here tonight and on the Zoom are to understand what the law is, to understand why the zones in Reading don't comply, what that means for the changes that we're going to have to make, and what we as staff see as the best direction based on our survey results. These are all the things that are in scope for tonight. These are all the topics we're going to cover. These are all the things we are welcoming questions on, right? Context, definitions, what is multifamily housing, what is by right development, history of zoning, zoning capacity. We're going to cover a lot in the next hour. We know it's a lot of content. Feel free to ask questions. We are excited to share this information with you. We do kind of want to politely also put some things as out of scope for tonight and for the next couple presentations. We're going to ask people not to do these things, largely because we don't actually have firm zoning change proposals yet, and we really feel that until people understand what the proposals are, there isn't a lot of point in arguing against them. So we're going to politely ask people not to do those things, and if they do want to do that, we're going to set them aside and discuss with them later. So that's what we're going to cover. We think it's really helpful in thinking about the law to first think about what lawmakers knew and what lawmakers were thinking about when they placed the law, right? What is the regional context that they were thinking about when they started drafting the law, right? We know that for the Boston region from 2010 to 2017, the region as a whole added 245,000 new jobs. During that same time period, all of the towns in the Boston region permitted about 71,600 new housing units. So it's great that the Boston region is growing economically. That's a positive thing. But the issue is when you're adding new people and new families to the region without a corresponding appropriate increase in housing stock, you end up in a situation where the supply of housing does not keep pace with growing demand. As that happens, right, vacancy rates go down as
Recording in progress.
Thanks, Andrew. As vacancy rates go down, housing prices go up, and that's what we've seen over the last 20 or 30 years in the Boston region, right? The increased competition for units drives up prices. Separately from, this mismatch of adding jobs and not adding housing, you also have questions within the region about the supply of the housing stock, as it is a region that has historically produced mainly single-family homes, right? And as lawmakers thought about the stock of housing in the region, the reality is that the region needs a range of housing types, right, to meet demand. Young people continually move to the region for educational and work opportunities. Baby boomers will continue to be downsizing over the next decade, and a lot of them hope to stay in their communities. And I think one of the questions that we ask about the housing stock is the housing stock prepared to encompass all of these things? Multifamily housing also has a lot of benefits, which I think is something that lawmakers recognize in putting the law together. It has environmental benefits, it requires less land, it can reduce auto dependency, right, if it's located near transit, and it is the chief mechanism we currently have for expanding our affordable housing stock. These are the things lawmakers were considering as they put together the law, what we're going to talk about. What is it? It was passed at the state level, so it's coming down from on high. It requires all 177 municipalities in the Boston metro area to confirm that they have a district of reasonable size where multifamily housing is zoned for by right at a specified density determined by each municipality's characteristics. We're going to go through every aspect of this law here tonight and explain what each of these words actually means. What we want people to keep in mind is that all the towns are working on this at the same time, and their requirements are based on the type of MBTA service that they have. That's why it's called the MBTA Communities Law. The relationship is based on the type of MBTA service. So there are rapid transit communities, there are commuter rail communities, and there are adjacent communities. Each of those communities has its own timeline for compliance and its own requirements. So while everyone's working on it, what everyone's doing is a little bit different, which is important to keep in mind. For Reading, we're classified as a commuter rail community, right? That's our official definition under the law. It means that at least half of our zoning district must be within a half mile of the Reading train depot downtown. The specific requirements that we have to meet are these. Our deadline is the end of 2024. We have to confirm to the state that we have a district with by right zoned capacity for 1,493 units of multifamily housing at a density of 15 units per acre of a district that's a minimum of 43 total acres. We're going to walk you through each piece of what that means tonight. The takeaway you need to know right now is that we do not currently have a zoning district that meets these requirements, right? That's all you need to keep in mind. We do not have anything right now that meets this specific list of requirements from the state. So we're going to start at the beginning of understanding what this really means. I don't know about you, but when you say half mile to me, I have no idea what a half mile is without seeing it. So on this map here on the left, this is downtown. I'm going to use my mouse on right there. We go. Yeah. This red is the train depot, and the blue circle is an approximate half mile distance from the train depot. So when we talk about being within a half mile, this blue circle is what that encompasses. Within that blue circle, there's actually a lot of space. So when we talk about a district of a minimum of 43 acres, within this circle, there are 660 acres of total land. Okay, within that 660 acres, there's 343 that are defined as, quote, developable. You get to that number by removing out roads, removing out public buildings, removing out parks, removing out things that you don't develop, right? Things that you're not going to build on. So we're left with 343 acres within that circle. This is just for context, right? That is developable. Of that, we need a minimum of 43. So there is plenty of options, there's plenty of space. The next piece of the law and our definitions that we want to explain before we go any further is just to make sure people understand when we talk about multifamily housing that there's a variety of options, right? Everything on this slide is multifamily housing. We know that when we say the word multifamily housing, people are thinking of this first one up on the left. They're thinking a big building with lots of units. Any housing that has 3 units on one lot is multifamily housing. The law does not specify which one you have to choose. You can choose whatever you want to comply. Everything on this slide already exists in Reading today, and all of it is within that half-mile radius of the train depot already, right? This already exists in Reading. There are options, and we get to choose how we want to comply. We also think that before we talk about zoning and zoning changes, it's really important to take a step back and kind of discuss what zoning is. Because we understand and we know that like most people don't think about it. No one thinks about it on a daily basis, right? Other than us, since it's our job. In short, zoning is a rule book for future development. And what we mean by that is that when you change zoning, it only impacts what happens in the future. Everything that exists today stays as it is until someone wants to redevelop a property, right? It only impacts future development. It's also a living document, and by that we mean that the zoning bylaw is updated and changed on a regular basis as our values change as a society, right? Our zoning bylaw has a bunch of topics in it. One that gets updated decently regularly, for example, is our list of business uses because the economy changes and the types of businesses that are included change. We want to just bring that up again as a point because changing the zoning is something that has happened and will continue to happen. It is a living reflection of our values. This cutout here on the right and the map we showed earlier, if you've never seen our zoning map, this is a cutout from our actual zoning map. This is our current zoning map. You don't need to be able to read what's on it. Here's what you need to know. If the color on the map is pink or purple, that is single family only. 94% of the land in Reading is zoned for single family homes only, right? Keep that in mind. 94% of our land is zoned for single family homes only, pink and purple. So if you're looking at a map and the color is pink or purple, that is a single family zone. This is a list of our current zoning districts. Again, we don't need people to like memorize anything with them. We will just have an idea, right? We currently have 5 residential districts. 3 of those are single family only. 2 of them theoretically allow multifamily. We have 4 business districts. These are the districts when we talk about changing them, right? These are the actual underlying districts that you see color-coded on the map. And these are the districts that we would be editing or working on in order to get compliance. Given that I've just told you how much of our land is zoned for single family only, it probably won't surprise you to learn that 75% of our total housing stock is single family homes. About 22% of our current housing stock as of 2020 is multifamily, so 22% is multifamily. It's also pretty interesting, at least to us, that over half of the housing stock in Reading was built prior to 1960. This big chunk here that was built pre-1939, all of that housing was built before zoning existed in Reading. That's something to keep in mind that'll become extremely important as we continue our discussion. Our modern zoning code, as we think of it in Reading, really was put in place in the 1970s, which means that only a quarter of our housing stock has been built under what we consider our modern zoning code. These are just things to keep in mind. Let me make sure I know those points. This is where we kind of are now. And as we think about zoning, the kind of next piece to understand, and that's important to think about, is how these buildings got built, right? How did our housing stock actually get built? So we think the best way to do that is to walk you through an example of how a new building gets built in Reading. So what we have here, highlighted down in green, is a parcel of land. The developer bought this parcel of land, came to us and said, I want to build this building. And we said, very interesting. Tell us more, because that's how the process works. And we pull out our list of things that are covered in the zoning bylaw, and we go through all of those aspects. Is this an allowed use based on the zoning of the land? What is the size of the lot? Does it meet frontage? Does it meet setbacks? What's the height going to be, right? We go through the checklist one by one. The process by which we go through that checklist is called site plan review. And site plan review is the process that our CPDC members here oversee. It is for by right development. What you have here on the left side is a zoning table. And so what we do for someone who comes in, they present what is required for the district and what they're proposing. And if it meets that, it meets the standards of by right development. And this is the process that we go through in zoning for by right development. They submit their site plan review application. We review it. If everything looks good, we schedule it with the CPDC. The CPDC holds a public hearing or public hearings. They go through a revision process. We receive comments from the public, and eventually the application is approved and the project is built. This series of steps is by right development. And there's a few points we want to make about it, right? In the future, right, one of the big concerns people have about changing our zoning in multifamily development is they believe that there won't be any say in what happens. Site plan review will always happen. This process will always happen in the future. We will always have a chance to provide comments. The public will always have a chance to provide input. Just because it's constructed by right doesn't mean that we don't have the ability to ask for revisions or to make sure that it meets the letter of the law and our standards. The second point, just as we move forward in these examples, this is just for by right development, and that means that it meets the current standards of our zoning. And we're gonna talk about two examples where development isn't by right, because the multifamily housing being by right is a key piece of the MBTA communities law. It has to be by right. Yes, question in the back.
What does, could you define the acronym CPDC, did I get that right?
Yes, it is the Community Planning and Development Commission. It is a fancy name for our planning board. Yep. So the first example for why something wouldn't be by right is because we've chosen to make it not by right. We've chosen to require a special permit or a waiver. Most people have heard of accessory apartments. Sometimes they're called accessory dwelling units. Sometimes they're called in-law apartments, right? There's a bunch of different names. But the concept is that you're putting a kind of secondary apartment on a single family house. In Reading, if you're adding that without adding new floor area, you can do it by right. If you're adding a new addition to your house, which is what people most commonly do, for example, is they'll put a new footage over, for example, a new garage. In that scenario, you're required to get a special permit. And this section of our zoning bylaw is actually pretty new. It was last updated in 2017. So when it was updated, it was specifically chosen to make it not by right and to require a special permit. The process that it looks like, right, to get a special permit, just so people are with us in understanding what this means, a homeowner would submit plans and they say, I want to build a new garage, I want to build a new apartment over it, right? We review that plan and we reject it because you can't do that without a special permit. That kicks off them appealing to the Zoning Board of Appeals. The ZBA will hear the case. This is highlighted in yellow because at this point there's a discretionary option, right? They can choose whether to grant the special permit or to deny it, right? Anytime you have a discretionary choice, discretionary approval, there's an opportunity for it to be denied. They can say, we're not going to give you your special permit, you cannot build your in-law apartment, project ends, or they do grant it, and it gets built. This scenario obviously has a few more steps than a by right development, and there's an opportunity where you don't get approval. There's a second example we're going to look at for why development isn't by right. And that's because the lot or the use doesn't meet the current standards of the zone. So what we mean by that, a couple slides ago I said that zoning only impacts future development. So what that means is that we today can make changes to our zoning, change aspects of a zoning district that could make a lot non-conforming in the future. What you're seeing here on the screen is a zone that is A40. This area is just north of downtown. Right here is Lowell, this is Maine. In this district, the minimum lot size is 40,000 square feet. There's only one lot in the entire district, which is this lot highlighted up here in yellow, that has 40,000 square feet. There's only one in the entire district that meets the minimum standards of the district, which means that if you wanted to develop on any other lot in that district, you can't do it by right. You have to go get a variance, you have to go through a selection of other steps, and it was chosen to be this way when they made these revisions in the past. It doesn't mean that you can't build on it, but again, the focus of the law is on by right development. and you can't do it by right. So we want to show you what it looks like to build multifamily housing in this district where multifamily housing is allegedly allowed. These are the actual steps that a developer took in the last 10 years in Reading to build a four-unit townhome on a 12,000 square foot lot in that A40 district. They proposed the project. We would say, we love your idea, but ultimately it does meet the minimum lot size. Because of that, they would appeal to the Zoning Board of Appeals. They hear the case, they decide whether to grant a variance. The variance would be required because it doesn't meet the minimum lot size. Again, this is a discretionary choice. They can choose to grant it or to deny it. If they don't grant it, the project ends. If they do grant the variance, the project then kicks off with site plan review, and it heads through the entire CPDC site plan review process that we already saw, right? CPDC is going to review it in the public hearing. They're going to approve or reject it. Because this was also a 4-unit townhome, this isn't where the process actually ended. Reading also has requirements around number of driveways that you can have allowed. Because of that, they had to seek waivers to build the driveways, and they had to be approved by the Parking and Transportation Task Force. So there were 3 steps during this where they had to seek discretionary approvals. This is what it took them to build a 4-unit townhome in Reading in the last 10 years, right? You don't need to understand all the steps, but I think you can see very clearly that the number of steps, each time you add on another layer, it adds time and it adds money to every project. And that's what we want people to keep in mind. The biggest question that you have when you start looking at things like this, the biggest question that we had is like, well, how did we get here, right? How do we have a zone where there's only one lot that meets the minimum lot size requirements? How did this happen, right? To understand the answers to that, you have to go back into history. And so we're very briefly going to take you back into some of the zoning history of Reading. As I mentioned earlier, the zoning bylaw was originally passed here in Reading in 1942. So if your house is older than 1942, it was built before we had standards around zoning. We've highlighted some of the kind of major points in time that we have made changes to our zoning. There are 2 that we're specifically going to look at tonight. That is 1969 and 1995, because these 2 changes that were made respectively 50 years ago and 30 years ago directly impact how we are going to change our zoning this fall. In 1969, there was a group of residents who lived on South Main. They moved into a district that was then called Residence B, which is what we now know as A40. That was originally the only district in Reading that allowed multifamily, or what was then called apartment homes. They moved into single-family homes that had built in that area. They were not aware that they had moved into a zone that allowed apartment buildings to be built. Someone proposed an apartment building to be built next to them. They were so upset by this that they advocated to have the zoning bylaw entirely changed and the minimum lot size increased in a special town meeting. This is a map of what the zoning map in 1962 and the one today. The A40 district we looked at is up here. That is highlighted here in yellow. That district goes back pretty much as far as these maps go back. If you look at the 1962 map, though, there's another section of what was then Residence B that doesn't exist anymore. And that's the one that the residents were upset about and got taken away. If you ever look at our maps and you wonder, why is there this tiny piece of A40 right here? And the answer is because that's all that remains of this original section. One of the things to highlight here is that though they solved their kind of immediate problem, right? They didn't want an apartment building next to them. And if you go back and read the letters to the editor from this time, they could have been written today. Nothing has changed in the last 50 years in terms of dialogue around apartment buildings being built. Not only did they change the zoning of their immediate district, they decided that it was so important that apartment buildings not be built in Reading that they changed the minimum lot size of the entire district to be prohibitive to development indefinitely into the future. So that is why today it takes 10 steps instead of 2 to build a townhouse in a zone that allegedly allows townhouses, right? And it wasn't just multifamily housing that people were against having built. In 1994 and 1995, the town changed the minimum lot size for single-family homes, our smallest single-family home district, from a minimum of 10,000 square feet to 15,000 square feet. The headline here we think is so interesting. Is it time to make it harder to build homes here? Not just apartments, just regular single-family homes. People really focus on slowing growth, slowing the building of new homes. What we want to highlight here, though, which is what this letter to the editor correctly calls out here, which is that when they changed the minimum lot size in this single-family zone from 10,000 to 15,000, they made the majority of lots in this district non-conforming because they are all smaller than 15,000 square feet, right? It says here, as a result, if someone wishes to add on to their house or do any work that requires a building permit, they will be required to go to the Board of Appeals. This results in additional time and cost with no guarantee that permission will be given to allow an addition to be placed on their home. So the issues we talked about in relation to the A40 are exactly the same for the S15 district in Reading. So this isn't something that just impacts multifamily, it also impacts our single-family home districts. This map is actually from an analysis that was done in 2013, 2014 when zoning updates were made. The purple outline is our S15 district. If you see it on the map in black, it means that it is a non-conforming parcel that is under 15,000 square feet. So it's most of them. Again, we show this to demonstrate that this issue with minimum lot sizes is something that is across many of the zones in Reading, right? And this is something that came from decisions that were made in the past. It impacts everyone, right? It impacts single-family homeowners. It impacts people who want to do new development, right? If you want to put an addition on your house and you realize you can't do it by right because your lot is too small. We bring all this up to circle back to the law, right? To talk about what the law really means. In 2019, it was summarized that for 100 communities in the Boston area, in the 3 years prior to that, only 14% of all the multifamily units that were built in those 100 communities were permitted by right. So the majority of multifamily units in the Boston metropolitan region are not built by right. They have to go through discretionary processes. What this law is really doing, it is requiring municipalities to remove barriers to development within their zoning in order to make future development of dense housing that is close to transit to be possible. That's a paraphrase of what the law is actually asking us to do, right? It's saying remove the barriers that you have put within your zoning to allow this to be possible. Because they had to choose a way, right? They had to choose a way to say, did the municipalities actually comply? So they came up with all their fancy list of numbers, and they came up with the new concept of zoning capacity, which we're going to run through, because zoning capacity is, again, one of the keys to understanding what they're actually asking us to do with the law. I'm going to define it two ways, and then I'm going to give two examples. Zoning capacity as a concept, it considers every single parcel as empty, and then it asks what could be built on it today under current zoning. So zoning capacity does not care at all what is actually on the lots. It only cares about what could be built under current zoning. To determine zoning capacity for a district, you will add up how many housing units could be, in a maximum scenario, built on every parcel based on what zoning allows, again, regardless of what exists on the parcel. So I'm going to give examples in two directions to see if we can really understand this.
So could you go back and put the slide back up for a minute?
Yep.
Thanks.
No problem. Zoning capacity also, just like for perspective for us, this is a new concept in planning, right? This is something they invented for compliance with the law. And because of that, it's especially challenging to explain, right? Because it's something that they said, mm-hmm.
So the previous picture there, that had all the lots with the black outlines,
Mm-hmm.
that would get 0 under this rule.
Correct. That is correct. If the lot is non-conforming, it does not count. Which is why we show you those pictures. You ready? Okay. First example. This building, maybe you don't recognize it, maybe you do. This is the Metropolitan, the Reading Village. This sits directly next to the train depot in downtown. It has 68 units of housing in it. However, this building is a 40B development, right? I'm gonna try to really briefly explain what a 40B is. So 40B refers to a section of the state law. It allows that when a town hasn't kept 10% of its total housing stock as deed-restricted affordable housing, right? So the state says you have to keep 10% of your total housing stock as affordable housing. If you haven't met that 10% threshold, The state allows developers to come and propose projects to them that essentially override your local zoning because the projects they're proposing offer really great affordable units, and the state says this is a priority for us. Because this is a 40B development, that means that it overrode our local zoning. If you've learned anything tonight, it is that pink is single family. This lot sits on S15, which means that under zoning capacity, this counts as 1. Because zoning capacity does not care what is on the lot, zoning capacity only cares about what you could build today under current zoning. This is zoned for single family homes, this lot counts as 1. Okay, I'm gonna show you an example in the other direction. This is a house that exists in Reading today. This house sits in the A40 zone you guys are becoming so familiar with. It's very likely we'll revise zoning in this district. This house, which is 1, could count as 4 or more, depending on how we revise our zoning. This house remains here as a single family house as long as the owner wants. Zoning does not change what already is on the lots. Zoning capacity just asks what could be built in the future. So this 1 is actually 4 or more, depending on how we change our zoning. So the zoning capacity works in both directions, right? It can take a building with a bunch of units that wasn't built by right and count them as very few. It can take lots that have 1 unit on them and count them as 10. All zoning capacity cares about is what you can build by right today. We did an early technical assistance here to have them do some analysis of our current zoning districts. We have 4 of them listed here. We had them go through and look at the acreage, look at the unit capacity, and then spit out for us preliminary density per acre. None of these districts comply. As we mentioned earlier, we don't currently have a zone that complies. There's a number of reasons why. Some of them, the acreage is too small. Excuse me. For the majority of them, it's because the unit density is too low, right? And our unit density comes out too low because we have a large number of non-conforming parcels, which we've just explained. And we also have a bunch of other technical reasons, right? Maximum lot coverage restrictions, parking ratios. We require waivers to build additional units. One of the points we want to make here about zoning capacity, right, is that when people are talking about our requirements, they look at that number of 1,493 units that we have to have in zoning capacity. We want to stress to people that that's not like net new zoning capacity. There is existing unit capacity, which you can see here, that's calculated for just a few of our districts, not even all of them. There is existing zoning unit capacity already, right? There's 1,200 units in 4 districts right there. So when we talk about meeting that unit count in zoning capacity, what we're really talking about that's new is just rearranging the zoning capacity that we have to meet the very specific new requirements of the state. So if you go through our districts today, and if we apply this to a bunch of them, like if you apply zoning capacity to a single family zone, you would end up with a number that's equal to the number of parcels that you have, right? All of our districts have zoning capacity. So we don't want people to be intimidated by that number. We consider it more a process of rearranging the capacity we have to meet the specific requirements.
So can I ask you?
Yeah.
Some of the things you're listing, like parking ratios, people can view them as an important aspect. So are you going to describe what you're proposing, where you're going to relax the rules?
So we are. Sit tight. Okay, we'll get there. I do have this in here to pause to just ask if there's questions. Are there any questions in the chat? We want to make sure if people have questions on the webinar, we're grabbing them. I will answer.
What is A80?
A80 is an apartment zone. It covers, there's some large apartment complexes out by the highways, and that is where A80 is. So it has a very high unit capacity and unit density because it is all large-scale apartments. So we have a picture later. It's like Reading Commons, Johnson Woods, places like that are zoned A80. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Can energy law requirements be incorporated into the by right somehow?
Do you want to answer that?
So,
Maybe we'll take that at the end.
yeah, we can
have
tackle
some.
that.
We do have a little bit about that on the end, actually. For people on the webinar, and if they heard that, she had asked if energy requirements can be incorporated into the law, and we will take note of that and make sure we answer that before the end of the night. We did want to pre-answer the four most common questions that we've gotten so far in our presentations, right? So these are the four most common questions we've got. When do we have to build the units? The answer is we don't. We don't build anything. This is zoning only, right? This is only zoning. Unit capacity is not new units. It's a total of what could hypothetically be built under by right zoning. How do we change what is built in order to comply? We do not change what is built in order to comply. This is zoning only. What kind of housing could be built, right? That depends on the zoning changes that we make. Once zoning is changed, it's up to each individual property owner to decide if they want to sell or develop their property at any point in the future, right? It's individual choices. And would the town eminent domain land to comply? No. The town does not have any, we don't have to build anything to comply. It's zoning only, so there is no reason to do that. These are the four most common questions we've gotten, so we wanted to just take a moment and answer those before we shift gears a little bit into the next section of information that we're going to present. Yes.
I was a little, just back to by right zoning, are you going to be talking a little bit more about that? Because I thought the impression given was that that neighbors or concerned people would have a say over any unit or anything coming in under by right, but that's normally not the case. There's not public hearings as far as I know on by right.
There is, so that's site plan review.
Well, it's a site plan review, but it's not, I mean, it's not opened up to, it's not a form of public hearing.
It is.
So it's not a public hearing under state law. If you want to get really technical about it, there's not a state law mandating CPD or public hearings for site plan review like there are special permits or variances, but we follow a public hearing process for site plan reviews, especially in this town. There's a long-standing history of doing that, and we'll continue to do that. And by right zoning and through a site plan review, public comment is most appreciated and welcome. What you can't do is put unreasonable conditions that make the project infeasible to build.
Right, but those items, you don't advertise those.
We do.
We do.
You do those?
We do. Yep, and the only typically items exempt from site plan review currently are single and two-family dwellings.
Okay, those are the same.
Yep.
So anything that would be 3 units plus goes through site plan review.
Correct.
Anything else? You good?
I don't have anything here.
Okay, perfect. When we started thinking about how to move forward, right, how we wanted to move forward on the process of the law, the first place that we went to is we said, well, what do we know about Reading's goals on housing? When's the last time that Reading ran a community-wide process to talk about housing? We've done updates to a housing production plan since, but the last true community-wide process was the 2006 master plan. So we went back there. We said, what were the goals from the 2006 master plan? What do we know about what Reading said were our goals for housing? Reading will provide a variety of housing types for a diverse population. That housing will integrate well into existing neighborhoods. Elderly renters, first-time homebuyers, empty nesters, and others will be able to find housing that matches their needs. And providing these housing types, including affordable housing, will be accomplished by improving the town's regulations to more easily allow certain types of housing, such as townhouses, multifamilies, and accessory apartments. These are great goals. These goals 1,000% align with the MBTA communities process. And these are the goals that were set out in the 2006 master plan. That master plan is super interesting for a number of reasons. There's a section that we thought was really interesting when we read it, which is that they directly predicted what happened in housing prices back in 2006. So there's this quote in the 2006 master plan housing section. It says, although multifamily production has seen temporary increases with periodic real estate booms, based on zoning and the historically low production of other than single-family units, it can be expected that most of Reading's future housing production will be single-family houses. The likely result will be a continuation of high housing costs and fewer opportunities for low to moderate income households, empty nesters, and the elderly. In that 2006 master plan, they also had an analysis of at the time, the current housing affordability gap in Reading. Based on 2000 census data, at the time, the median home value in Reading was $271,000. Does anybody in this room know what it is today? Yep, you're in the zone, 750, 800. Current median single-family home price in Reading is $815,000 in 2022. It was up about 23% in 2 years. Condo sales have followed a similar pattern as well. In order to afford the median home price in Reading of $815,000, you would need approximately $235,000 as your household income. Median household income in Reading is $133,000. What that means is that if people in Reading had to rebuy their houses today, they couldn't, right? Your median income would not be able to afford you the house that you already own. You could not choose to live here again. A lot of that relates to the housing stock that we have here, right? We think it's helpful to think about Reading in relation to broader patterns in the state. This is housing units by type. This is Reading in yellow, and the state is in black. Compared to the state, Reading has a far greater stock of single-family houses. Compared to the state, it has a much smaller stock of multifamily houses. The only one where we're even similar, actually, is large multifamily units, which is pretty interesting, and we're going to talk about in a slide or two. When we were also looking at kind of thinking about housing, thinking about our goals, we thought it was important to look at what Reading has actually built over the last 20 years. So we went back and we pulled our permitting data in buildings, and we said, what did we actually build as net new units? What actually got building permits and was built? Between 2000 and 2010, there were 252 new units built. The majority of those were single-family homes. From 2011 to 2020, the majority of what was built was multifamily, which is in line with national trends. After the Great Recession, a lot of home builders stopped building homes. And so multifamily apartment building really took off during that time. So the majority of what was built in that decade was multifamily in Reading. What we want to call out about that specifically when we look at the multifamily units that have been built in Reading, I know most people focus on the ones that were built in downtown, right? They see them the most, they're the most visible. Only 28% of all the multifamily units that we built in Reading are in downtown. The vast majority of them are not. Over half of them are in one apartment complex alone, and that is Reading Woods, right? So the majority of the units that we built are tucked away. Most of the units did not go into downtown. What that means when you look at kind of the breakup of where they are and what they are, the makeup of our multifamily housing is really skewed towards large developments, right? 20 plus unit buildings make up 57% of our existing multifamily housing, which is interesting because as we're going to see in our survey results, these are the buildings that people in Reading dislike the most. And yet this is exactly what we have built here. This picture is an actual picture of Reading Commons. This exists here in Reading today. Not everyone knows that. And we just wanted to say this is what we have, this is what we have built, and this is kind of where we are headed. I want to bring up a few additional stats before we transition again. These are things to keep in mind, right? Again, as we're talking about housing in Reading, 12% of Reading residents are disabled. 73% of those that are disabled are 65 plus. Have we built appropriate housing? Do we have good housing options for those people? An estimated 1/3 of Reading households have incomes that are considered low or moderate income. And of the total households in Reading, 62% are family homes. So we have a lot of families here in Reading. Do we have appropriate housing? Do we have starter homes, right? As we kind of worked our way through the data and thought about housing and what we know, these are points that jumped out to us to consider. And when we looked back at the goals and we started looking forward at our MBTA communities process, we said this is an opportunity, right, to reconsider if as a town we've actually met the goals that we set out at this point almost 20 years ago, right? Have we provided a variety of housing types for a diverse population? Can a first-time homebuyer or an elderly resident find housing in Reading to match their needs? Have we considered our place within the region and what type of community we want to be known as? And in choosing to protect small town character by making development harder, have we forfeited our ability to meet these other goals, right? These are things we want people to keep in mind as we then move forward to talking about changing our zoning, to circle back to say we had goals, we set them out, did we meet them, right? And this process is another opportunity for us to engage and think about those things. As we lose my place on my piece of paper. As we started to think forward into then what we needed, right? We said, here's what we have, here's what we know about the past. what do we need to know going forward, right, in order to really start thinking about changing the zoning? And the first question we had for ourselves was, do we really know what people want, right? We've had lots of comments from the public about things they maybe don't like, but do we really know what type of multifamily housing they would prefer, right? We can look back at the goals, we can look back at what we built, but like, do we know what people want? And we said, we don't know. We actually don't know what people would like, which is why we started off our engagement in phase 1 with a survey. So we kicked off our process earlier this summer with a survey on multifamily housing. The goal of this survey was to receive actionable direction from residents as to the preferred types of multifamily housing for Reading. We did receive feedback from some people that they were dissatisfied that our survey didn't expressly ask whether people wanted multifamily housing. The reason why we did not ask is because we only asked questions in the survey that we did not know the answer to. We already know that there are people in Reading who are not interested in multifamily housing. We know people in Reading who are not interested in single-family housing, right? We already know these people, we already know these opinions. They come to our CPDC meetings. From our survey, we wanted to ask new questions, questions that we didn't know the answer to, and that would help give us direction, right, to move forward. The survey was open for about 3 months. It was publicized on the town website, it went out on social media, it went out in the town manager's minute, the rec department sent it out, the library, Ben sent it out. We presented at the senior center, we presented to boards and committees, in-person presentations. We were at community events over the summer, publicizing the process in the survey, and we got 758 total responses. Now I'm gonna go through the results, okay? We asked the most important question two different ways in our survey, right? We asked the question about what people would prefer in terms of multifamily housing. We asked it first as a ranking question with pictures, which is what the pictures on the screen are now, right? These were the options we presented to people to rank. These 4 options: triplex, a 4-plex quad, a low-rise apartment, and a mid-rise apartment. And then we asked a similar question without pictures. On the left side, you're seeing the answers to the ranking question, and on the right side, it was the question that we asked as a select all. So between the 2 questions that are both asking about types of multi-family housing that people would prefer to see, the last option that came in last place, right, is our mid-rise buildings. The largest buildings received the least amount of support. In our select all question, triplexes and 4plexes came in essentially essentially tied at 53%. Low-rise buildings came in a little bit behind with a still respectable 42%. When we asked with pictures, we did get a different series of answers. They came in a different order, right? We still have mid-rise here in last place. 4plexes again came in at the top. For this one, with the images, low-rise and triplexes switched places, which to us tells us that the images did influence people's decisions and that the form of the buildings does really matter to people. People do really care what the buildings look like. If we go back to the pictures for a second, the 4plex in the images is the smallest, right? Do people rank that one higher than a triplex because they perceived it to be visually smaller? Do people rank low-rise a little bit higher than triplex because they like the way it looks, right? To us, the difference between these 2 answers just says that people really do care what it looks like, that the aesthetics of the buildings that are being built really do matter. And that people, not that they want a small unit count of buildings, but they also want buildings that visually appear a certain way. We did specifically also ask about architectural styles. We asked what people would support. It was no surprise to us. People love traditional New England architecture, which is great. Townhouses, townhouse style of architecture also got majority support. We did think it was interesting that even modern architectural design came in at 27%. Next time someone comes into our office and says that no one likes the modern apartment buildings downtown, I'm gonna point them to this and say it's not everybody. There's still almost 30% of people in Reading who like modern looking buildings. It may not be everybody. But it is fair to say that people do prefer a little bit more traditional looking buildings. On the right side here, you're seeing a cutout from our question about concerns. I brought that forward because the #1 writing concern was neighborhood character and aesthetics. And so the answers to the architectural question, that being ranked really highly as a write-in, and then also the differences between our earlier ones, really indicate to us that people do want something that fits in with the aesthetics of their neighborhood, which leads us to say that people really strongly prefer kind of house-like architectural options, right? Things that will meld with the existing architecture of their neighborhood more. So we kind of interpret this information about architectural styles and that you can infer between questions to talk about more house-like buildings. We also asked people where they would prefer to see buildings. We separated it into 2 questions. We asked about 3 and 4 unit, kind of smaller buildings, and then larger buildings. For both, the majority said near public transit. That's where we want multifamily housing. For larger buildings, the second option that came in, the option came in second place was along or within commercial corridors. And for smaller buildings, they said the top choice there was walking distance to pedestrian amenities. In general, if you kind of look at the percentages here for all the responses, people are more willing to put smaller units in a variety of locations than they are larger buildings. Excuse me a second. But our takeaway from this was that people felt very strongly that multifamily housing should be near public transit, along or within commercial corridors, and walking distance to pedestrian amenities. Those were our takeaways in terms of location. We also asked about concerns. We asked about concerns twice. We asked about if people were concerned about one small building being built in their neighborhood. This question was asked as a select all. People were allowed to choose as many options as they wanted. People chose everything, which is great. People are concerned about a lot of things. The number 1 choice was traffic in terms of writing concerns, which we saw earlier, neighborhood character, school enrollment, crime, absentee landlords. From this, we thought it was really helpful because a lot of the things that were brought up as writing concerns are things that we are already aware of and are thinking about and are working on. We know changes to school enrollment is really important to people, which is why we've already met with the school committee. We're already in discussions and dialogue with them. We know infrastructure is a concern to some people, which is why we're already talking to DPW. We asked these questions so that we could help understand people's concerns and so that we can, in our process, work to mitigate as many of them as possible. We also asked people, we said, well, people have a lot of concerns. What if we say you have to choose one, right? What one item are you gonna be most concerned about? I love the answers to this. Number 1, because the top answer is everything. All of the above is a concern to me. And then number 2 answer is none of the above. The benefits outweigh the concerns, right? We view this top answer, right? People saying all of the above are concerned to me. Those are the people who are, you can think of them as either being anti-development or just being most concerned about development. The none people, those are our pro-housing in Reading people, right? Both of them exist. They are number 1 and number 2. Outside of those kind of top choices, we have changes to the character, we have traffic. One of the things we did want to call out as being really interesting to us was that when people were allowed to choose a bunch of options, they chose parking. When they were asked to choose just one, the parking options did not come in any of the top choices. That maybe when people have to choose just one, maybe parking isn't as important to them as other aspects. It's interesting. We also looked at this question by dividing it into look at age ranges, because we thought that this question is a really interesting proxy to talk about generational differences on multifamily housing. So we know that younger generations, younger people are much more in favor of housing, not just multifamily housing, all housing, single family housing, anything, right? That's because young people are the people who are most impacted because they're most active in the rental markets, they're most impacted by high rental prices, and they're most impacted by trying to enter home ownership. So we broke down the previous question by age range. If you look at this, right, people who say all of the above are concerns to me, the people with the largest percentage of people choosing that group are 65 plus. The lowest is our 18 to 34. And then if you look at the reverse, which is people who said none of the above, right, those are our proxy for pro-housing people. Our youngest age group has the most people who have chosen this, and our 65 plus, which is the oldest group in our survey, has the least. Again, we're highlighting this just to remind everyone that there is a huge generational divide on this topic. It's important to keep in mind, partly because we also know that the people who are most active in town government tend to be people of older generations because they have more time. And we want to remind them that just because they have these views does not mean that they are the only view in town. And that the housing market has different impacts on different generations. I see your hand raised, yes.
I'm curious how you decided to come up with these splits, these different age ranges. What did you use to guide that? And I just want to note that the 18 to 34 seems to have a much larger range than, say, the 55 to 64 or 45 to 54, which were only about 9 years difference.
We did. We had to choose ranges to ask demographically. The 18 to 34 encompasses, I think, 3 actual groupings that were asked in terms of ages on the survey. We didn't have anyone under 18 answer the survey, so we started at 18, even though we did have younger age ranges. And because the number of people in that 18 to 34 group encompassed a few of our divisions within the survey responses, but there was a smaller group. So we totaled them up to try to make them more even in terms of our survey respondents.
But if you broke that out, were you seeing more concern from those that trended closer in the 30-year age group than the 20-year age group?
I'd have to look. We do have all of these survey results, these charts, and written comments available on the website as a PDF. There are also handouts of it available on the table out there if you want to take them home with you and look through the charts more. The written comments and this are here. We do have a breakdown, which isn't included in the PowerPoint, of the actual number of respondents we had in each age group, which would answer part of your question, and that is in the report. We did ask about a few other things in our survey, things that we knew were going to be part of our future discussions, and we thought it's a great opportunity to go ahead and take people's temperature, see what they think. We asked about the minimum number of off-street parking spaces to require per unit. There was no majority answer for this one. The largest respondents group came in at 1 parking space per unit. The majority of our respondents actually fell between 1 and 1.5, which would be in line with our current zoning, depending on the district. It is between 1 and 1.5. We also,
For a minute,
Yep.
sorry. I do have to call you out on that comment about the older people in town government. No, I think that's very unfair. In town meeting, I do not think it's the majority of over 65. You want this to pass town meeting because that's the buck stops there on zoning. And a lot of older people have children that are facing these challenges of a very expensive housing market and are very in tune with that. So you have to be careful about making those kind of global statements about any group of people.
yeah.
If you go back to that data point, and I know that that lower range is not exact, the data still shows that there is a generational divide in perception. So I think the comment has credibility to it, and I also understand that it feels targeted, but there is data here.
What you talked, Mary spoke about people in town government. I'm not talking about people who took the survey, because I don't know how that was skewed and who took that.
Mhm.
I'm talking about who makes the decisions in town. Zoning will come to town meeting. Town meeting has many new and young faces. I've been there over 25 years. It's changed a lot. Granted, there's some older people, but not as many as you think. So
No,
I
that's a
think
fair point.
that just, going forward, you're making a great presentation, you're gonna do a good job when you come to town meeting, but we have to be, diplomatic.
I know I would
Absolutely.
love for more of those younger age folks to vote, and I would
Mhm.
work with them rather than getting engaged in town government, because everybody has a great time, so.
Yep. I will say I don't know that I meant that specifically to Reading. I would say that there's a lot of statistics in general in America that show that people who tend to be most active in meetings like this tonight, or just in general, don't tend to be younger people and don't tend to be people with young children even, for example, right? And that's just statistics of engagement in America, right? And so my apologies if that, but yeah, if that was taken to be specific as like a
Well, I
thought about
think
Reading.
in terms of who comes out and who's able to vote,
Yeah.
right, and get involved in details and stuff. So I agree with that part, not in terms of who's making decisions.
There's a lot of young people in this room, they have time.
So thank you.
Parking, yes. Perfect. The last thing we're going to talk about from the survey, we asked about additional characteristics. So when we talk about housing, when we talked about housing policy, you can accomplish other things, right? When you do housing policy, there are other things that we can incorporate into them. So we asked people to rank kind of what we thought were some valuable and important characteristics that we could potentially address in future housing policy from 1 to 6. We said, let's ask people to prioritize these for us, right? If we're working on these topics now or a little bit in the future, right? What are the things we want to incorporate? One of the things we want to point out about these, the options, is that a few of them really lend themselves or are most related to a particular building form or building size. So this last, the one that most people chose is their number 6, which is building placement very close to the sidewalk to activate the street, is a characteristic that's typically associated with mid-rise buildings. As we saw earlier, mid-rise buildings is the last choice out of our options, so it wasn't necessarily surprising to us that a characteristic that's associated with that style of building also wasn't ranked very highly. Mixed use, ground floor commercial space, same thing. That's something that's typically associated with mid-rise buildings, also was not ranked very highly. Affordable units we thought was very interesting because it had the most people who chose it as number 1. That's this kind of red-orange 32. But overall, when you add up its positive percentages, people who ranked it 1 to 3, comes in 4th, which is kind of an interesting dynamic. There's a group of people who are really passionate about it, but maybe on the whole in Reading, not everyone is in agreement about whether or not affordable units, by that we mean deed restricted, legally restricted affordable units, is something that's important for us to prioritize. The fact that pedestrian infrastructure transit improvement requirements was ranked number 1 in terms of positive made sense to us based on the kind of location data that we received earlier in the survey. We also thought that the green space, yards, and placement of buildings farther back from the sidewalk was very much in line with that idea that people kind of want house-like multifamily units. So it makes sense that they would want yards, things to be put back, and kind of more of a style of a home. And what came in number 2 is increased sustainability and energy efficiency measures, which you had brought up, which is something that is a potential priority. And I'll let Andrew speak a bit more to that in the Q&A. Make sure nothing else I want to say on this. So I've covered kind of our takeaways as we went through. Want to just spell them out here so we're all on the same page about what the takeaways are from the survey, right? Respondents prefer multifamily buildings with fewer units, triplexes and fourplexes. They want smaller buildings with fewer stories, house-like architectural options. They want them to be near public transit, near commercial corridors, walking distance to pedestrian amenities. And top concerns are traffic, open space, changes to neighborhood character with new multifamily housing, right? We went through the survey. These are our takeaways. Where we want to go with this next is we want to translate what these takeaways mean, into how we will potentially change our zoning, right? This is the information we got, and now we as staff are going to move this forward into the next phase, which is say, how do we actually interpret this into changes? The where and the what of what we're going to do. To us, they were very clear. Multifamily should be near transit, commercial, and pedestrian-friendly areas. This directs us to focus the full acreage of what we're required to zone for to be within this blue half-mile circle, because that is, from our perspective, really the only place in Reading that meets all those requirements of being near transit, of being near a commercial corridor, and being pedestrian-friendly. So that, to us, again, says we should do all of our zoning changes within this area, get the multifamily units here where people think they should be placed. Mid-rise buildings came in last in terms of ranking in our survey. As we alluded to a little bit earlier when we were talking about characteristics, mid-rise buildings are really the only type of buildings in which we include ground floor commercial space, or what we call mixed-use buildings that are part business, part residential. If we remove mid-rise buildings from our choice of options and say we're going to focus on other ones, the other types of options that we have to consider do not include commercial or business space. Because of that, we feel very strongly that the business and commercial districts of Reading should stay that way. They should stay for businesses, they should stay for commercial uses. So if we're prioritizing types of multifamily housing that don't include commercial or business, that leads us to cross out the commercial and business districts as the place that we would do our zoning. Or just say that again in another way to make sure we're all on the same page, right? So if we're removing from consideration the type of building that has commercial and business use in it and saying we're not going to do that, the other types we have available to work on, which is our smaller 3 and 4 units, we do not do business and commercial uses mixed in with residential for that size of development. And because of that, and because we want to leave our business and commercial districts as just for businesses, we don't want to just put in residential that doesn't have business. That leads us to remove all of our business and commercial districts from consideration. So on this map, that would be our business B district, our business A district, and technically our industrial also falls in there. Yes?
I'm just wondering, so we have, is it Green Street downtown, commercial spaces, first of all, that's been empty since it was created. I've had some conversations with some other folks that specialize in commercial, and economic pressures notwithstanding, you know, they've been questioning whether, putting a lot of commercial space on the ground floor in a dense district is gonna attract the commercial we think it's gonna attract. Because there's no big parking, people wanna have parking versus could that building, let's say on Green Street, could that just have been all residential? Because they could all walk to the train, they could walk to the businesses. So I have questions about that, and then just to make sure, so Ben and I attended an MAPC seminar early this summer where they said, you know, it doesn't have to be this perfect circle. If you have a wonky solution that you'd like to try, we could work with you. So certainly that South Main, we've seen a lot of development there. And that first example is my favorite example because there is some green space left around it. But I think we're gonna see some more on South Main. So I am very worried about the heavily residential districts that are in the left side quadrants of that. To go back to Mariana's question earlier, if it's a 2-family and they build a 2-family, that's gonna cover like every square inch of the property and it's okay. Like the neighbors aren't gonna know and they're gonna feel like that's where you get into changing the character of the neighborhood, making things feel completely crowded, blocking people's sunlight, eliminating their privacy. So, you know, forget my original question. Yeah, getting back to that model of, do we have to exclude the commercial districts if we're looking to build more affordable housing or more housing period? And we have to stick to this model that we've been using for about 20 years where, yeah, we want commercial on the first floor because the truth is, you know, maybe Trader Joe's would go down there and get like a giant parking lot, but they were, so, and it's been empty for over a year, so it's not a simple question I'm asking you, sorry.
Yes. Should we rephrase it for the webinar people first?
Yeah, if I can. So the question was if we should be, and correct me if I'm wrong, excluding commercial areas which really promote a higher, denser, mid-rise uses. I don't think we've completely wiped that off the table. So, you know, if we hear that that is a desire from the town, then we can certainly look to somehow fit that in. Mixed use cannot be required under MBTA communities law. Our 40R zoning district actually also does allow multifamily by right, but it's set up to incentivize a mixed use based on height parameters, parking, and other dimensional controls that the mixed use is incentivized, it's not required. So the option is there for developers already to do both, but I think they come in understanding that this is a commercial zone that demands vibrancy and demands uses that attract people, and that's what we've been building towards it. And so I understand the concern that the commercial space at Gould Street has been vacant for a year. I think that was also different set of circumstances coming out of COVID and the pandemic.
Let's say Walgreens.
Yeah.
Maybe the question really is that we should ask that as a community, we've been, as you banged the nail. We've been incentivizing commercial streets, development on the first floor, and what we really need is housing, and what we have is a train, and we have a vibrant downtown, so.
Yeah, I think it just comes back to not only just what our survey is pointing towards of promoting smaller development, but also what we've seen in the last year or two under zoning changes that happened at 40R that we would now have to go back and nearly reverse a lot of those decisions that were made just last year to promote open space, density requirements, having higher efficiency standards and elements tied to them. We'd have to go back and reverse all of that, and I guess I haven't heard yet that that's a true desire from the community in relation to MBTA communities. I think if it isn't captured under MBTA communities, it can certainly warrant its own discussion of should we consider how to open up downtown again for development, and what does that mean for zoning. So
Here's another one, that Shoot project.
Mhm.
Shoot project was approved over a year ago.
Mhm.
Where is it? Like, the economy's changing and zoning doesn't
Yep.
change very often, so I'm not faulting you, it's hard.
yeah, so the economy is changing, and I think that's part of the reason they're taking a step back to look at their plans and go through permitting. From what we've heard, they're near permitting, but we don't want to put a timeline on it. So I don't know if you have more to add.
There are lots of extraneous circumstances for why first floor commercial spaces are not filled. Walgreens is a large footprint that could easily be a mixed use development. However, the leasing structure of that building, like most institutionally backed commercial spaces, fosters an untenable rental environment, right? It's far too expensive for a smaller, medium-sized business to move in there, so we get other types that like to move in. Regarding Chute Street, that's a whole other sort of legal battle with existing tenants, and so that's why that's been held up. Another extraneous circumstance. And then the last one, Gold Street, Dave Tagorth, the developer, has been trying to sort of fill that space for a long time now. Much of it is economically driven, and he hasn't done the full build out of that space downstairs because he's struggled to find tenants. So we are lucky to have only 3 vacant properties. There are others, yes, Natural Food Exchange like that, but we have a low vacancy. So I think that's good for that. We can talk about the rest offline about sort of downtown development, but maybe back to.
Yeah, I think the only point I would add to your points about commercial space are that, like, regardless of whether we incentivize it or not, mid-rise buildings still came in last in our survey, right? Like, if we're talking about the buildings that people want to have in Reading, what we would put in these commercial districts or in Business A, whether or not it has commercial space, is a mid-rise building. And so that's an open question we have for the rest of this process is, our first stage of our process said, you guys don't really like these buildings and you don't want more of them. And if we don't want more of them, we have to choose a different option. And that's what we're gonna talk about here, right? Which is if we're not choosing that, our priority is for smaller scale multifamily developments that fit into existing neighborhoods. Yes, I see your questions.
More of a comment than a
Yep.
question, if you'd like me to hold it that for later.
No, you can go ahead.
It's kind of, I guess, a chicken and egg thing, but, I guess putting together a couple dots from your presentation, it seems to me that most people, when answering your survey, were thinking about what they would want in their neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's very different than if you ask the question, drawing a box, saying, here's where we're proposing this new zoning district to be. What types of structures would you want to see there? And so, maybe rhetorical question here, but if a box included the downtown district, I would guess a lot more people would say they'd be supportive of the larger developments that include a commercial space.
That's what we're hoping to find out in the next stage of our process,
So I was
right?
just going to encourage,
No, yep.
Continued surveying of residents as you go through the process of what they want to see and where.
Yep, I think our kind of first stage of this analysis is us saying, here's what you've told us so far. Here's how we interpret that. Is this interpretation correct? Do we want to move forward with this interpretation, right? And that's what we're going to be doing in our next event. I have just a couple more points. Let me finish. This is my last slide. Do you mind? What's your question? Okay. Because of where we're focused, right, we want to talk about what zones we are thinking about, what zones we are thinking about as a fit, right? If we're leaning against our business districts because of the preference that we have seen so far against mid-rise buildings, that means that A40 is a natural fit given the existing zoning of it. It doesn't have enough acreage alone. This is the A40 that we've been looking at all night, which is this one, which is just north of downtown. It has about 17 acres, which wouldn't meet our minimum acre requirements. Because of that, we propose combining A40 with portions of S15 to create a new zoning district. Again, S15 is everything that is on the circle in pink. The new district would allow multifamily units up to a maximum number and/or a maximum density per lot. We're not quite sure how we want to get there yet, but it would put a real cap on what you could build. And from our perspective, one of the things that's really important when we look at the distribution of where we want to put our zoning is that when we change the zoning, yes, there is a good chance that construction will follow from changing the zoning. We really want equal distribution of any zoning district to be spread across various parts of the downtown in order to distribute the kind of secondary effects from construction, which includes potential future enrollment, potential taxes to the infrastructure, the water, the sewer. So because of that, we think it's really important to disperse the district so that it's not just in one area. We had this specific discussion with the school committee. They felt very strongly that if possible, they would like any zoning changes to be spread across a variety of elementary schools, right, just for perspective. The last thing I want to remind people of what we've kind of discussed tonight is that most of what you see on this map in downtown, this is the area of Reading that was built before zoning existed. So a lot of what's in the area on this map does not comply with the zones that you see on this map, right? Just because this area is called single family does not actually mean that it is all single family. There is currently a variety of multifamily uses sprinkled throughout what is currently the S15. So the reality is that depending on the portions of it that we could choose to include in our future district, we would actually just be legalizing a number of existing uses that are within this area. We want people to keep that in mind. This is a slide that I showed earlier, right, about examples of multifamily housing in Reading. The ones that are highlighted in orange are the ones that we feel are the ones that are the best fit based on the survey results, right? They're kind of house-like, they're smaller scale, they're 3 or 4 units. All of these are currently in the S15 or the A40 area of Reading. This is what we're talking about zoning for. This is what already exists. And we just want to remind people of that as we kind of move forward the discussion into the next phase of working through all the parameters that are actually necessary to change the zoning. And we wanted to, this is the last concept that we want to leave people with, which is that as we move forward to try to work towards compliance, we want you to keep in mind the idea that compliance is an equation, right? The way that we're going to get to compliance is by thinking about it as an equation. The way that we actually comply with the state is that we submit a zoning district, where we submit a shapefile of an actual area on the map, and then we answer 51 questions about that district. We answer those 51 questions along all these categories. These are all the categories that we're going to go through and adjust in the process of changing our zoning. What is our minimum lot size? Do we have additional requirements? What is the appropriate number of parking spaces per unit? What's an appropriate building height? What is an appropriate maximum lot coverage, open space, setbacks? These are all the aspects of zoning that will be adjusted. Excuse me. When you input these into the tool that the state uses, it spits out a bunch of information that basically tells you whether or not you comply. As you adjust every variable that's in the blue box to the left, existing lots, will shift in or out of compliance. As they shift in or out of compliance, it changes our ultimate unit density per acre. And we want to stress this now because it's important as we go through the process and as we work towards meeting compliance with the state in terms of the unit density per acre, that people understand that every time you tweak a single aspect of this, there will be lots that will fall out of compliance and will change our final unit density, right? We want the process to be as inclusive as possible early on, because the farther we get into the zoning and the more changes you make later in the process, it can be extremely difficult for us to meet the required unit density per acre, which is why I want people to think about it like an equation, and we're going to work through all the variables and adjust them and hopefully meet that end goal. We wanted to bring up a few things that we know are absolutely going to be changed, right? Like these are things we're going to have to change in our zoning. The first one we absolutely know we're going to change is minimum lot sizes. And we know the direction they're going to go in, they're going to go down. Our minimum lot sizes are going to go down. The reason because is currently 90% of our lots in our hypothetical districts are considered non-conforming lots, and we need the reverse of that. We need 90% of our lots to be in conformance. The way that we do that is that we adjust our zoning districts to reflect the reality of what actually exists in Reading, so that our minimum lot size in our zoning district reflects the actual lot sizes that we have. And then we're going to go through all the other aspects we talked about. We're going to talk about setbacks, building height, coverage, frontage, and parking. And we're going to be doing all of this in our next event, which you can't see when it is, which is Wednesday, October 11th at 7 p.m. It's an interactive workshop. We're going to go in detail on all those topics, right? You brought up parking. We're going to talk about parking. We want to talk about setbacks. We're going to talk about building heights and go through kind of all the next areas, talk about the impacts, things we think we can carry directly over from single-family zoning and what that's going to look like. And that's where we're headed next. We hope tonight help people get some perspective on the background of the law, the aspects of the law, zoning in Reading, and we are happy to take any questions. I know you had a question. I'm sorry.
I was just wondering, when we're talking about a multifamily,
Yeah.
like a three-story, a triple-decker essentially, right? What's the square footage of each unit on average that you would anticipate?
So it's hard for us to find average unit sizes based on our existing data that we have. You know, if you look in theory, I guess I live in a triple decker, so I can use that as an example. My apartment is 850 square feet, 900 square feet, so times 3 over that 3 floors, 2,700 total, give or take. But it's typically around 1,000, I would guesstimate, give or take. Sorry, what was that? My lot is probably about 5,000 square feet, and we have 4 parking spaces in the rear and wonderful landscape that I maintain.
Right, so then it would seem that the type of demographic that would be attracted to that unit would be either someone who's looking to downsize out of their house,
Mhm.
or young or you know, small starting families of young working professionals.
Correct. That's the intent, I think, to provide that diversity that makes a transition one way or the other more natural and easier to achieve.
But this law, it seems, it was imposed really to encourage commuting to Boston. So in that sense, the demographic would be kind of we're talking about a 15% increase in households in town. And that would seem to be a pretty significant change in the current makeup. It's going to go most likely to a younger community that are going to ask for different kinds of services, different types of entertainment, which is really going to affect the character of the town, the way it's currently
So
existing, wouldn't it?
to try
Can
to
we answer
answer
that?
the first component of the law being intended to be more specific towards commuting or denser development, I don't necessarily think that's the case. I understand where people get that interpretation, but I think that's really what gives each community, and on a regional level, why this is applied across many, because many communities have many different needs. Reading has done a wonderful job of mid-rise and downtown development, despite what any one person might think about in each individual project. You've been a 40R leader, and if not one of the best 40R districts in the state. So that just changes our priorities and sense of what the community feels, and each community is gonna undergo the same thing. So do they prefer downtown mid-rise development, or do they prefer smaller natural stock that will add to their diversity? So I forget your second point.
Changing
That-
character.
Changing character.
The
So-
changing character from a much younger demographic, people that don't have a stake in the school systems, where I think that's one of Reading's most attractive features.
Yeah, so I think Reading's natural character is unique, and it's demanding. People want to be here, and I don't think by diversifying your housing stock you would change that. What makes you unique in Reading is not your land use policies, it's your school and recreation programs, it's you all being here tonight to help guide us in the future discussions. Those are the elements that make you unique, and I think allowing for a more diverse or younger population, if they can afford housing here, only adds to that because they're willing to, one, stay here in the long term once they come here and experience it, two, implement themselves into those programs, the school system, the recreational departments, volunteering, town meeting, things like that. So whether or not they have different goals and ideas and visions for the town than those currently here today, I couldn't say. I think we'd have to, you know, hear them out if they were to come here.
So the equation you talked about, how you're balancing things, so are you going to offer different scenarios, different
We are.
trade-offs?
We are.
Yep.
So are you already kind of playing with it? I'm just trying to get the sense about lot coverage, I don't know, setbacks. I mean, are we talking like what Andrew was saying, like the lot is taken by the building and some parking, or is it like different?
So it's just a unique mechanism in the tool itself, but I think what our ultimate goal is to, if this concept that we've discussed tonight moves forward, is to try to mimic to the maximum extent possible the dimensional controls that exist today for single family development. That way it's not pitting one against the other. Whether or not that's achievable, we are testing that right now, so we're still going through that check. There might be some things that might have to be reduced. I don't know for sure yet, but it is an interesting equation because if you put a minimum lot size on that's more restrictive, you're likely now needing to put a higher density on those lots because you have more non-conforming lots. So you're looking at lesser setbacks, lesser parking, maybe more height if you want big lot development. If you really want to open it up for everybody, we might have more flexibility to look at different setback options, look at different parking requirements and how those things play together. So ultimately our goal, for sure, height, we are almost confident can stay substantially similar to a single family use today.
I actually like your point that if it's spread across a bigger district, so the burden doesn't fall on a small part of town.
And I think part of that not just lessens impact to infrastructure or school, but it also helps promote that consistent character around a radius, right? And so you have your downtown core and you're building out around all edges to help supplement and support your downtown, and that's what our hopeful vision is.
Question, two questions, two separate questions. One is, what's your target goal for the timing of this, getting this to town meeting at the end goal? And secondly, what's the status of two families? Because this is, you have to zone for the 3 families and up. We have single family zoning. And I thought most of the 2 families were grandfathered, so where does that leave them? How are we going to?
So we have to reach compliance with this law by end of calendar year 2024. Our intent is to bring zoning to April town meeting, which is an ambitious and timeline and target, because we have to open public hearings sometime within the next few months and go through the process to get to town meeting and on the warrant. We feel it's achievable as long as we continue working with you. If we can't make it or it doesn't pass at April town meeting, we'll have a shot at November town meeting. The 2-family question, if again, when we point back to the concept that we're looking at and discussing tonight or at the next forum, we wouldn't be prohibiting 1 or 2 unit developments in that zoning concept, and so those 2 could be achieved, and now any non-conforming 2-family status that exists today would thus, in essence, become conforming, at least a conforming use. So that helps homeowners that exist today and future homeowners, and that, again, would just be a nice target to set.
I'd just like to say that it has been a persistent problem in the community that owners that live in homes that are maybe used as a single family but can be 2 and 3 families have faced an uphill battle to get that permitted. So I can definitely see that helping with the housing stock that's already appropriate. So that's great.
Thank you.
I want to go to John on the webinar.
Yeah, I don't want to ignore the Zoom. We do have Zoom people and questions if we can jump to a few. John, go ahead. I think you're unmuted.
Maybe?
You there, John? He typed that in the chat, is that?
No, that's somebody else. Okay. John, we cannot hear
Can
you.
you-
Oop,
Oh.
we can hear you now.
Okay, headset works.
There you go.
Speaker doesn't. Okay. thank you for all your hard work. I guess to start, this is a great presentation. I've sat through a whole bunch of these, and I think this is the best one by far. I'm just wondering if you guys have any sense of maybe like a ballpark, how close to compliance would we get if we just allowed anything that currently exists in the S15 to be built elsewhere in the S15? Like if there's 3 family homes in that zone on whatever size lot, if that just becomes the minimum size for 3 family homes, like if you allow people to build what's already there, what
Yeah.
does that do for unit density or for compliance or?
Good question. So, again, the tool looks at more than just unit counts and lot sizes. That's kind of one of the major factors. But it is one of the most important factors. So in our preliminary review, which we would likely share more at our October forum, looking at the existing density and unit counts, it looks achievable that if you were to put 3 to 4 units on each parcel, allowed 3 to 4, that we could achieve the density and zoning size of reasonable size in the area. So it is a great concept. You just have to, again, be cognizant of that list that Mary shared on setbacks, parking, dimensional controls, other elements, open space, and things like that that can impact it in the tool. So it's not just unit size and lot size, unit count and lot size. We have to factor in everything, but in a very, very preliminary review, it looks nearly possible. And maybe if that's up to 5 or 6 units, maybe it's more possible to achieve under existing setbacks and dimensional controls. Maybe if it's that 3 or 4 unit threshold, you're looking at a little bit lesser dimensional controls to them, but there will be some room for conversation there. Good question. And we had a few in the chat, so I just want to jump to them if we can.
This person they have 5 questions at once.
Wonderful.
I think some of them are quick answers though, so maybe
Yeah.
just
So number 1 was, how does our plan compare to similar communities like Wakefield or Wilmington? Interesting question. Again, each municipality is unique in their existing lot sizes, their existing zoning controls, and so each is achieving it in a different fashion, you could call it. So we know that there are communities that are looking at the downtown mid-rise mixed-use developments to comply, and we know that communities like Andover are also looking at this 3-4 smaller multifamily unit concept. So there's a mix mash with communities that are representative town meeting commuter rail communities and what they're going through on the process. So we are in line with them, but everybody's compliance just looks a little different on paper.
I think we're gonna answer this one, right?
Yeah, his second question was, why not rezone individual lots that currently have multifamily housing so that they count? So in the concept that we're discussing, that is under consideration, right? There's existing non-conforming multifamily uses in single-family zones, and there's existing non-conforming multifamily lots that don't comply with the A40 multifamily lots, and all of that is up for discussion and consideration. I guess I'll take this opportunity to say we've gotten a lot of comments that why can't we just do zoning over Reading Woods or Summit Towers and Gazebo Circle? That does not achieve compliance. So one, a lot of those areas do not meet minimum acreage requirements for the zone, nor do they meet the requirement that any zoning district we propose be at a neighborhood scale that isn't over a single development tract. So we cannot just target zoning over existing development, high dense multifamily development, because it's not going to achieve the vision and will be flagged for non-compliance. Number 3, they asked, why not reduce lot size requirements so that most lots meet minimum requirements but cannot be split in 2? Bingo. Reducing minimum lot size requirements is a need and a must. They cannot be split in 2 dependent on, I guess, what we'd call frontage requirements and lot width requirements, that you wouldn't really be eligible to subdivide your lot. If you were trying to split it in the back, so you had a really long lot and you wanted to subdivide down the middle, also doesn't meet frontage requirements unless you build a right-of-way. We are not changing subdivision control standards under this concept. It's really the zoning uses allowed. Number 4, not a question, but I agree that people don't want mid-rise buildings in neighborhoods, but would be okay with it in commercial. I agree, that was never our intent to say we would look to put a mid-rise in a firmly residential multi or single-family neighborhood, a mid-rise commercial development. To the earlier point, we did have our maps and all of the Q&A available for the survey, which were all linked together, so all of the info was there, but we understand that confusion and take it to heart. Number 5, last question, what are school enrollment impacts 5 to 10 years down the road? Great question. We had met with the school committee. What's hard to project and what we know right now is that based on existing permitting data and where we've achieved a high number of multifamily units, school enrollment is still down over the last 10 years. So there's been no direct correlation to date of multifamily housing and school enrollment impact. We know that the school system still faces challenges on classroom sizes, specific grades, maybe specific schools, but we're working with them to better understand, based on our zoning concept that moves forward, what it means for them and what they would maybe like to prepare for most, which from their questions and comments came down to less about enrollment and more about like the needs of students who needs of students who need transportation or translation or pedestrian amenity, other elements that are both the school system and the planning and town hall share long-term goals of accessibility, diversity, healthy communities. So it's more about how they can help prepare for those impacts and understand where they need to improve to help meet all of the needs of the diverse people, if I captured that right.
Yeah. I mean, I think the point we were just stressed to people is that there is no direct relationship in between construction and school enrollment, even though people feel that there is. The research and literature does not support that. There's just not a linear relationship between those two things.
And that's the other important element of, even if zoning passes, it again comes back down to that individual property owner that, downtown saw a boom in downtown development because the timing was right, the economy was right, our zoning was right. You might not see that expedited growth here in this concept. You might in some certain lots or neighborhoods, I can't promise anything, but it's unlikely that all 1,500 unit capacity or whatever unit capacity we zone for is built all at once or in a very, very quick time frame.
Did you have anything else in the chat?
Nothing else in the chat.
Okay.
Do you have
I don't
anything
think
to
there's
add?
any. I don't have anything to currently add. I see 2 other questions.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, I apologize if it was covered earlier, but is there any discussion around impact to like tax basis or tax rates?
So it's a question that comes up a lot in any zoning changes and what it means for the tax base. From the studies we've looked at, there's really no impact multifamily development on property values or tax evaluations. I know it's gonna come up, I'm sure, again. We'd like to meet with our other town departments so that we better understand how to able. I'm not an expert in this field, so I don't wanna give you any concrete answers, but by allowing you to do more with your property, you might even see a potential increase in tax valuation. But again, those are specifics that I don't quite know the exact details on, so we'd like to meet with our town departments to better understand to answer that question.
I'll also just add to that the kind of answers to some of the more detailed questions like that, we can't investigate them until we actually know what our final zoning proposal is. So it's hard to estimate the impacts until we've kind of gone through the process and ended up in a place where we feel confident that the public, at least some members of the public, right, support the final zoning proposals we want to put forth. And when we have a better idea of the size and maybe the number of parcels affected and the potential number of units that could be included, then we'll have a better idea and be able to better investigate answers to questions like that.
Yeah, I just wonder if like, if there are different scenarios where you might say, oh, if we go this scenario, then maybe the property tax rate will decrease, or that scenario will increase it. That might influence.
It's a great point.
I can try to find something to answer that.
Yes.
In a related question, have you looked at all yet, what extra cost to the municipality would be incurred, additional firefighters, additional police, if the existing firefighting equipment would be sufficient for taller or, wider buildings, things like that, water supply?
We haven't delved into those exact specifics with them yet. It's a conversation, again, we're planning to hold very soon with public safety departments, but I don't have an answer for you tonight.
I will say that we just want to remind people that this is about zoning. There's not a linear relationship between changing zoning and construction happening. So the impacts that people are worried about happen when there's actually new construction, right? We can change zoning, does not guarantee that new buildings will actually get built. So there may not actually be direct impacts, right? These are things that we are considering and are talking about, but we just want to remind people that this is a discussion about zoning and not actually about construction.
And the good thing about having these conversations now with them is that they can be aware of where we are in the process and start to adequately plan their needs, both school, public safety, infrastructure, all of those departments, that we're in touch with on a regular basis can now start to make sure they're taking this into consideration.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question in the chat that's been waiting for a little bit. I'm gonna
Yep.
have them unmute.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Yes, thank you. Bruce McKenzie. I tried to put this question in the chat, but you didn't see it. There's a lot of commercial and industrial land down around Stop and Shop, Market Basket, DPW, the building where the temporary library was. And the railroad is double track there. I wonder if the MBTA and the railroad would be willing to move the railway station. That would allow trains to pass each other. So a commuter train could be parked at the station and another train could pass it. So it would be to their advantage. And maybe a lot of those commercial buildings could be replaced by mid-rise buildings. They'd be within walking distance of downtown, and it would be an easy for commuters to get onto Route 128 and 95 from there. That's all. Thank you.
I appreciate that comment. I think the industrial district, as we've discussed internally, does certainly warrant conversation in terms of redevelopment and new growth there at some point, and it could be opening itself up for that. I think it falls a bit out of the scope of MBTA communities, again, when we're looking at multifamily housing. The concept that we're looking at for no mid-rise, no commercial, et cetera, that the industrial district doesn't really promote multifamily housing that doesn't have that. So it's a tough area in terms of the tracks. To move the depot is a significant undertaking, and it would take away from all of the downtown development and work that we've done. And I don't think we really want to lose aspects that are important to our downtown. I think, I don't know what the MBTA is going to plan to do with their tracks in the future, but maybe it's doubling the rail at the downtown station and looking to improve that station itself. Maybe it's a second station at Walker's Brook. I don't know for sure what they're planning to do. We've reached out to try to gauge their long-term planning vision, but.
I was gonna say, to the school's point about trying to have more distribution throughout the town. So I know we have to do this, and thank you, this has been a great presentation. So what we see with new single-family construction outside of the downtown is, making it's driving the unaffordability issue.
Mm-hmm.
Because they are not allowed and they are not incented to even build a two-family. And why does Reading have to have mansions, if you will? Very large, very expensive, oversized homes, and that is the only thing being built outside of the downtown. So
Because that's the only thing
yeah,
allowed
good
to be
ideas,
built.
I'm open.
Yep, yeah, that's the only thing allowed to be built under subdivision control. You have to meet the 15,000 square foot, 100-foot frontage, lot widths, lot sizes, high right-of-way controls in the subdivision parameters, and that does drive to unaffordability because it's just not the most efficient use of land. Anybody else?
I just had one more comment actually about your question or comments about character in the downtown and sort of maybe two pools that might enjoy this type of multifamily housing. Maybe younger people early starter families, I think is what you said, and then elderly people that might want to, or 65 plus, that want to age in place and free up housing stock. I think we've seen, and this is anecdotal, but like there are a lot of young families in Reading, and I think there's been a recent uptick in that demographic, and those demands of those folks are different on the downtown. We're doing more events in the common. They're asking for more programming. So I do feel there is a benefit to having those types of stakeholders at the table, especially near our downtown. I think it's a benefit to our character. I think that it brings integrity to it and a fresh kind of perspective. So that's all I'll say as the economic development director and as someone that programs the downtown and sort of stands in defense, especially of the small businesses that would benefit from this type of zoning change.
It has been one of our favorite parts of tabling at public events and Ben's events and other events is meeting these young families that we don't get to hear from on a regular basis, given the restrictions of what is a public forum and the time frames associated with it and the process. And so it's been a very nice opening conversation with younger families, with older generations, being at these events and having a fresh 5 minutes with everybody to have an open conversation has just been very beneficial for us, and we hope for them as well.
We didn't get to your energy question.
Correct. So thank you. Good point. So under the law, we cannot expressly require that multifamily have more stringent energy requirements. I'm kind of trying to open up the debate of if we said all of the development in the area has it. What's interesting about energy efficiency is that it's not really a zoning restriction, right? It can be tied to sometimes density waivers or certain elements like that, but it's not really a zoning requirement. So it's more of a select board policy or townwide policy or charter that really kind of says to the building code, like we've adopted the stretch code, that you have to build all electric or you have to meet certain efficiency standards. So it's an element we certainly wish to promote to the maximum extent possible, and we're undergoing the net zero plan right now, and we're undertaking what hopefully becomes green communities at some point designation. We have adopted the stretch code, so there's a lot at play there already, and we certainly would like to see that continue to move forward.
So if your property is not located within that circle zone, are you guys planning on making it easier for future development? You know, if any homeowner, if they have bigger lot, multifamily, and if they want to extend it
Outside of that radius?
outside of that radius?
I would say we're certainly open right now to having the conversation, and if it can somehow correlate to the zoning changes we propose, then certainly, right, there's other pockets of A40, small pockets, but they're kind of built out. I don't know how much further into the S15 we'd be expanding if, again, that concept that we've discussed moves forward. Keeping it around the center and these existing small lots makes the most sense on paper, but I think certainly if all goes well, in the near future, maybe the community has a conversation on S15 as a whole or S20 as a whole, but I think right now it is that focus in that half mile. We know there's other areas along Ash Street, and I think there's a odd portion of S15 that splits the Business A corridor. We've heard actually a lot from residents in those general areas that abut commercial uses or industrial districts that they'd like to be able to do more. So I think we'd love to explore that option more. I can't say for sure if it's gonna fit into this exact proposal yet.
The half mile is a guide right now, right? It's guiding our discussion because it relates back to the specific requirements we need to meet for the state, but it's not an exact area yet, right? We can swoop out, we can take portions within. It's meant as just kind of a general guiding idea about like, this is kind of where we're headed. So we're open to it, if people are open to it. I think we'll end there. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for listening to me talk about zoning for an hour. I hope it was informative and educational.
I'd just like to say thank you because this is a really complicated concept for people to understand. I think the presentation was really well done and the questions and answers were very well answered.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. I very much appreciate that. Staff works very hard in Town Hall, and you have a lot of good staff. So we have a wonderful community to support with it. So thank you. I'm just going to quickly plug again, Wednesday, October 11th, our second forum, if you can make it. There's also a handful of flyers outside. We're looking for volunteers for the Net Zero Action Plan. We have a Walker Brook Drive redesign corridor initiative that there's an open survey. Please take that survey if you haven't already. New resident open house committee is coming up. If you happen to be a new resident, please come. Many, many other initiatives. Town staff is always here for a conversation. Please reach out to us at any time, and we are more than happy to help. And that's it.
Thank you, everybody.